I'm Oliver Blowers, Compositing Supervisor here at Flawless, and today we're going to be looking at the VFX package, which can be exported from any theatrical VUB when using Deep Editor. So we're going to be working in Nuke today. For any of those watching who are not familiar with this piece of software, it's primarily designed for 2D compositing, and this package itself is also designed for anyone who's, working in the 2D compositing world. So we can just dive right in. There are two main things to cover. What does the VFX package contain? And then what we can use these for. So what we can use those assets for that are within the package. So we can dive into the assets. One asset that isn't exported to start with is the plate itself. We'd always assume that you'd already have access to the footage that you put into Deep Editor, so there's no need to export that back out again when you're done. So we're only providing the kind of necessary files that you wouldn't have had previously. So the first one to look at here is the VUB itself. So this might look a little strange, but these are all the pixels that Deep Editor has changed. So if we bring in one of Nuke's merge nodes, we can put this over the top of the plate, and there should be no visible jagged edges like you'd see here, because by the time we get to this edge, it's already a nice soft transition. So if you export this and decide that you're just fixing one frame, or it's minimal touch-ups, you could potentially work straight on this image, merge this over, and there's no additional work there. This also keeps our file sizes of the exports nice and small, because in this case we have a plate that's over 4K, but in terms of the actual amount of data, it's considerably less. So this isn't the only layer available in this file. This is actually a multi-layered EXR. So using this layer contact sheet node that we have in Nuke, we can see what else is available. So this layer here that we just looked at, kind of think about this as our beauty pass if you're coming from maybe a CG background. This actually has some baked-in compositing already done. So Deep Editor itself will try its best to color correct, add some motion blur, regrain your output as closely to the original as possible. But if you're not happy with the quality that it's produced, then we can just go over here and shuffle out this layer, which is called the Pure Neural Render. And this is, pretty self-explanatory. This is what our model spits out without any of our compositing processes on top. So you can think about this as a kind of going back to the start without any of the additional stuff you've thrown on it, because then you don't have to remove the grain, do your work and add it back on. We have this without grain, without motion blur. You can do your cleanup, then add that stuff back on afterwards. And then we also have an ST map. So this can be used just for projecting some masks onto the face. No need to animate this. It can then adjust in real time. So to sort of prep this for work, there's a few little steps that you'd want to do. First one is to shuffle out that Pure Neural Render into your RGBA channel. And then we can bring the alpha over from the ST map. And that will give us a nice soft mask that we can then use again to merge back over our plate. So it's dispensed that jagged mask that we can see in that original beauty. And now we've got a much more sensible mask that we could use for our work. So this is kind of AOVs, the main output that we get from the VFX package. That's what we have here. So the next assets available are all Alembic files. So there are 3 Alembic files included in the package. We have a camera, we have a source mesh, which will align to the face of the plate, and then we have the target mesh, which will be aligning to our new output or our VUB'd output. So getting a scanline render, we can see we have this very friendly face here. We can open this up in Nuke's 3D space and see what this looks like. So just taking this, we're currently looking at our target mesh. This should align quite nicely to our VUB output. And we can see here that it's matching that. And then if we're to switch to the source mesh and switch this to the plate, it's then lining up a little closer. These meshes aren't necessarily completely on point, but we like to think it's a decent starting point, and should allow for some basic automation and procedural setups in your scripts while you're working. So what I can do is, now that we've seen some of these files, I suggest we have a look at what we can actually use them for, and how I would suggest going about cleaning up a shot like this. So over on this side, I have just a quick script that we can run through, and we can just have a look at how we might apply some of these techniques. So the first one that we're going to look at is getting some more detail onto this face that may be absent in the deep editor output. So looking at our plate footage here, and I'm really going to have to zoom. It's done a good job, but the difference will be minimal. But we can see here on the face there are some small bits of detail on her face, on her chin, just little like creases, folds. Every person has these, and without them it could just look a little more fake, and we just get that realism up a little bit. So using the geometry and using a sort of projection system in Nuke, we can actually get this quite fun looking image of the original plate unwrapped into UV space. So we have the source here going into this project 3D node into the camera, applying this material to that source mesh, and then just rendering this out with the scanline render. The UVs are square for these facial geometries, so adding a little reformat node before this scanline render, just set to square of any size. I'd recommend 1 or 2K will probably be acceptable. And once we've unwrapped the plate, we can then grab the geometry that we have for our target, so our VUB'd output, and we can apply that material to a point where we've now kind of unwrapped and rewrapped the original facial texture back on. So using this, we can then take some of this detail and we can merge this back onto our VUB. And now we can see we've got a little bit more of that skin detail just added back. There's a bit more definition here on this mole, and some of this detail that we can see on her chin is added right back in. So you're probably thinking, why not over the mouth? Because we're changing the mouth, we don't really want to be rewrapping into this area. I'd recommend if you're doing this technique, that you're just adding it to these kind of areas of skin and avoiding the mouth and the lips as much as possible. So for some procedural masking for that, that's where we can use our ST map. So what we can do is just take a look at how we're using it here. So we're shuffling out that ST map here, drawing a mask down here in UV space. So again, this is on a square. I have this square here. This is kind of the area where I would like to include that skin detail, and then this here is just stenciling out that mouth area. Using that, we can use the Nuke's STMap node, or if you're in another piece of software, I know that Fusion does have support for STMaps as well, so this shouldn't be a Nuke exclusive thing. But you can then see here that we have this output here, where I just have a mask just for that area where I want to add that skin detail. A bit of dilation and a bit of blur to make this mask a little tidier. And then that's what we're using here. And once again, this is before and this is after. So everything that we've done here, completely procedural. If you decide you want to change the performance, or you receive a version 2 or 3 of the output from Deep Editor, then you can just plug this right back in again, plug your geometry back in, and you shouldn't need to change anything here. That's why we want to include these sorts of assets, because this is very doable without any of these. Just a little more tricky, a little more slow, and a little less automated. So, because we've just unwrapped that texture from the face and whacked it back on, one unintended consequence might be that we're taking some color information from the plate and putting this onto our render that we might not want. In more dynamic lighting situations, the Deep Editor outputs will adapt depending on the facial expression. Someone who's puckering, for example, might catch light that's above them, and someone who's not puckering might not catch that light. So if we're changing the facial expression, we're not really going to be wanting to change the color from Deep Editor. So to bring back some of that color, after I've done this detail work, I'm taking that pure output there, prepping these so I've just got the pure neural render, and then I'm blurring that to a decent size. I think I'm using a kernel of 30 here. And then equally, on my main pipe where I've added the detail, I'm then applying a Laplacian operation just to this area, and then plussing back this blurred just in that area too. So just going from before to after, you can see there is quite a dramatic difference in color in this area. So we should now be more closely matching the color. And if we zoom all the way out and do 1, 2, 1, 2, it now doesn't look any different. It's only that nice bit of detail that we're adding back there instead. So this is a recommendation I have for if you're working on these outputs, is do trust the color that comes out of Deep Editor. I think it does a fantastic job at kind of working with the lighting that you have, and it doesn't necessarily have an understanding of that, but it's all magic to me. It does a great job, so we tend to trust it. And that goes for mouth interior as well, and teeth color, which we'll show you next as some of the teeth correction and making the teeth look a little more sharp and true to life. But in terms of luminance, we try not to change the luminance as much as possible. So again, for the teeth, we're using some of this geometry. So here I'm doing a little project 3D from the plate. I found a frame where I've got a good view of her teeth, and we're kind of projecting those onto a card in 3D space, and using the camera from the VFX output, we can put that card roughly where the head geometry is. So one good benefit is that the facial geometry that is exported is actually locked to the center of that 3D space. So it's only the camera that moves. So it's a great way to project anything around the face because you don't have to animate your card. So we now have this patch that will be aligned to where she's moving in the original. You can see it's tracking that movement pretty well. Looks a little funny, but I think you get the idea. And then once we've got these teeth in, you can comp these in however you want. Just for today, I've got this pretty simple paint through. So we can see that before there was maybe some artifacting, a bit of an edge on the mouth interior and the teeth here. And then we can just reveal those plate teeth, and that's looking a little better. One other benefit of doing this work is that if you change your facial expression, your top teeth don't tend to move because they're locked to your skull. So here's the original footage, and here was the output we got from Deep Editor. The teeth are very close, but there is a visible difference in that teeth position. But then if we look at the plate, and then after we've done the teeth cleanup, you can see that the teeth now actually match where they should be. And it's one of those things that you probably wouldn't notice, the teeth slightly drifting here and there. The teeth outputs we get tend to be pretty good. But, if you just want to go that extra mile, then this is very much available to you. So again, just to kind of reiterate this, projecting teeth from the plate onto a card, rendering using the camera that we get as part of the VFX package, and then just comping these onto your pipe however you want to. Adding a bit of sharpness, and then that's pretty much it. That's the setup that I've got here today to show you. After this, you do your regraining work, and then you're all good to go. And then we can just have a little look at the before and after. So this is before, this is after. I guess some things to point out is maybe the grain was a little bit heavy here in the deep editor output. So we've now matched that a little bit more nicely. We have some skin detail that's been added back, and the teeth are in the right position. And again, all of this is very much automated apart from this little step here where we're revealing those teeth. But again, if you're smart with your ST map, you could be making a mask for the mouth, and then you can use that to reveal the teeth patch that you've worked on. So, other things that you might want to consider that I haven't really covered here are things like this necklace. So, in the original plate, this necklace has a little more detail than the output that we have. Maybe some of this hair is being distorted slightly, and the same goes for this side as well. Some of that hair is a little bit softer, maybe not quite in the right place. And it's not something that's easily noticeable until you start zooming in and A-Bing with the plate. But if you're watching this, you're probably used to doing that, and familiar with being quite nitpicky. So how we take this further is begin to create some of those in-painting patches around the edge of the face. The reason I haven't really covered these in more detail is because it's not strictly relevant to the package we're getting out of Deep Editor. These are more, I guess, traditional cleanup techniques. In theory, you could use that geometry in that ST map to make a mask for the face, so then you reduce the amount of roto work that you do. These are all things that you can have a go and try. But that's pretty much it for this. Just a quick recap of what we've covered. The package itself contains a multi-layer EXR containing a composited output of just change pixels, the pure neural render, an ST map, and a few masks. It also contains a camera, and then 2 skull geometries, one that matches the original plate, and then one that matches your VUB. Then we looked at some of the techniques we can use to fix up this output that we have. So we did the unwrap rewrap to get that skin texture looking better. We covered how you might use the ST map to create some procedural masking. And then we looked at correcting teeth position. And then here we are. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to this. These are just some of the techniques that we've kind of begun using internally on some of our projects here at Flawless. I hope that you found some of these useful. Nothing here is particularly complex, so you should be able to get right to it if you're an experienced compositor. So thank you very much, and I wish you well.